With Geometry Dash's long-awaited Update 2.2 set to release after over 6 years, the entire landscape of the community is going to change dramatically. With all of the new features that the new update is going to bring, there's little reason to not be jumping for joy with all the new content that the game is going to see. But one change that has been presented over the past month has had a notable portion of the community concerned for the update, that being the coming physics lock that could potentially knock down the top players of today. But before we go there, let's explain why this change is even happening. Throughout all of Geometry Dash's history, there's been a large disparity in the quality of devices that are used to play the game. They range from lower-end mobile devices to big beefy supercomputers that can crush any level that is hurled in their direction. These higher-end devices with high refresh rate monitors have proven to give massive in-game advantages to players who have access to a high-end system. And combined with several years of pushing the game's limits, top-level play has been all but locked away by high refresh rates breaking the game's physics. It's because of this contrast that made RobTop choose to rework the game's physics entirely, so now every device can play on the same physics, leveling the playing field for all players, and ensuring nobody has to spend hundreds of dollars on a 240Hz monitor just to get on the same playing level as a talented player. On paper, this sounds like a massive change that looks to make extreme demons and levels on the demon list more accessible to the average player. And while it does do its job, there's one major problem that looks to jeopardize the quality of this change. The physics lock in the new update is set to bind the player to physics of 240Hz at the maximum, while being a major upgrade for the mobile players and those who have played on 60Hz. For the top-notch players and those who have pushed the game farther for years, 240Hz is actually a downgrade compared to today's standards. The demon list allows players to use any FPS value up to 360 frames per second, 50% more than the value that players will be locked to in the coming weeks. This, in succession, could make the game run less responsive than what is currently allowed today. For certain game modes, the use of higher refresh rates is all but dependent on in order to pass extremely tight gaps in the hardest levels, and putting a ceiling on that directly contradicts the current standard of play, and could have its own problems for players who are looking to push the game's boundaries further. Completions, and especially verifications of the hardest levels in the game, have generated millions of views over the years. Zoink's tidal wave verification reached 1 million views in a single month, and the level is still not even rated. The verifications of Acheron and Silent Clubstep also have view counts in the millions. These completions have the potential to bring people back into the game, so if the 240Hz cap becomes implemented, and in the event that it actually cripples top-level play, then this upward trend that has kept the game moving through a 6-year waiting period for an update will be in extreme turmoil. Though it's been demonstrated that levels near the top aren't impossible to complete on 240Hz, the vast majority of completions in the top 10 have used 360 FPS, thanks to MegaHack's FPS bypass making higher refresh rates more accessible. But that being said, once Update 2.2 releases, MegaHack won't be able to function for some time. And even once a 2.2 MegaHack is eventually ready to release, the legitimacy of a physics bypass has been called into question by the majority of the community. So potentially, we could be moving back to 2018 standards, where physics bypass hacks are banned from play. While this hasn't been set in stone completely, it's a possibility that has been floating around for quite some time. There's a number of possibilities that the community will take though, so I'd like to take this video to examine all the routes with the new physics. But before we do that, if you like what you're watching so far, why not subscribe to the channel? All it takes is just one click. Let's see if we can reach 20,000 subscribers before 2024. Alright, now back to the point at hand. The first scenario on the table is the complete outlaw of any physics-altering hack, making all players use the 2.2 physics for any completion of any level. This would certainly be the easiest option to implement as it requires no other work, but this could potentially be extremely dangerous. Like we've talked about before, if the physics in the new update completely usurp the capabilities of beating the top 10, then it could do one of two things. It could make the entire top 10 and even top 20 eons more difficult, and the community struggles to adapt to the new changes that are presented towards them. As a result, the demon list stops moving for an extended period of time, could be several months or even years. The hardest level completed on 240Hz is Codependence, a 2-player level, so taking that at face value, the demon list's difficulty ceiling immediately rewinds 2 years into the past. Once the community eventually finds their rhythm with 240, then we start to see the usual trend of increasing difficulty, though it would come very delayed and we might not see the fast trend of verified levels that we've become accustomed to. This would probably be the worst case scenario, and while it wouldn't completely kill top level play, skill progression would flatline for the future. But another perspective of this change is that since universal physics will be accessible for more players, there will be more players capable of completing some of the harder levels, creating an influx of new levels and potentially a new wave of top players to compete with our current era. This would obviously take a little bit of time to happen, but the window wouldn't be nearly as long as the previous scenario that we just went over. There are already lots of talented players who can make the leap up to the top with a change like this, and I'm all for it. But in the case that bypass capabilities are removed for good, the demon list will allow its players to play levels on a 2.1 private server with the old physics, regardless of how the physics are like in 2.2. The main nail to hammer here is that 360Hz won't entirely be gone forever, you just may not be able to experience 2.2 levels with it, and the new editor features may not be for everyone, so if you'd like to experience older levels, or another possibility is that you're trying to verify a level that was made in 2.1 on the 2.1 private server, then this route is definitely more feasible. There's already a dedicated community that uses a private server for update 1.9, so I could definitely see this happening again with 2.1, although at a much larger scale. All of this talk is about scenarios where 360Hz physics are completely abolished, but there does remain the possibility that in a future update, we get a feature that allows you to freely change your physics. Such a fix could come in the supposed 2.21 hotfix that plans to add explorers as a main level. I'm still really sad about this level being delayed. This would be the most surefire way of resolving this entire dilemma that players have found themselves in. Though as we've seen from RobTop for years now, such a fix isn't a matter of when, but if. So what if we just take matters into our own hands? A mod will almost certainly be developed that will bypass the physics to match what 360Hz felt like in 2.1. Wouldn't that just be a simple fix? Just wait for the bypass to be updated to 2.2 and move on with our lives? Well, it seems that in 2.2, such a mod could legitimately be seen as cheating, and users would be treated like cheaters. We're not talking about the rules of the daemon list. They've made it abundantly clear that if such a mod would see the light of day, then it would be welcomed with open arms. An underlying worry is that if a level were verified on 360Hz, whether that be through a private server or a bypass in 2.2, then that level might not even get rated. We can't be certain how RobTop or the mod team would respond to a mod like this, but considering that 360 FPS verifications that have used the FPS bypass have been rated for over 2 years by this point, it would be very odd for everyone to suddenly walk back on it. There's a whole separate tree of possibilities that result with the hypothetical addition of this mod allowing players to change their physics to resemble that of Update 2.1. The first of those being, well, obviously, levels that are verified on this bypass don't get rated to begin with, and this could lead to its own tree of possibilities. Could the daemon list completely disregard the decision of the moderators, or would these levels just not get placed? There's far too much that's unknown for anyone to make a decision, so the only option is to wait until the update is released. The other, more simple option is that these levels would be rated just like how levels verified on 360 FPS and 2.1 have been rated. Well, I mean all of them except for Tidal Wave for some reason. Seriously, how is this not rated? Surely it may not look the best, but it's at least worth a star rate, right? Wait a minute. Don't tell me. Essentially, walking back on 360 FPS now would essentially make every completion before 2.2's release get an asterisk mark, which, depending on who you ask, is the right choice or completely unjust. To be fair, there's also the possibility that some levels may end up breaking as a result of the change, which is why the best case scenario would be to give players the option to change physics to the player rather than forcing it on everyone, where they can decide for themselves on whether to risk levels being bugged out. Such a fix would hypothetically release sometime after 2.2 in this case. Though if you want to ask me, I'd still count all 360 FPS completions as legitimate, whatever happens to the bypass in the new update. The players shouldn't be at fault for simply playing by the standards that were given to them by the dedicated playing community. Oh, but then there's the argument that it's the fault of both the list team and the players for using 360 to begin with, considering RobTop made a vague message in the GD Discord server back in 2019, 4 years ago that everyone definitely saw, putting the blame on the community who wanted to push the game forward. I try to keep my videos as impartial as I can, but this is one of the few times where I have to chime in. Considering that 360Hz monitors have been on the open market for years, and aren't even that outrageously expensive compared to other lower refresh rate monitors, and even 240Hz, the move up to 360 FPS on the daemon list is in my eyes completely justifiable. It may or may not be correct in your eyes, but it at least has sufficient reasoning to be implemented. Bypassing has generally been a controversial subject to a decent area of the community, and it's perfectly understandable as to why. Everyone has their own views on what should and shouldn't be allowed, and the FPS bypass is one of those highly divided areas. Some people do consider FPS bypass as cheating, while others view it as a quality of life tool that allows players to be successful in the present day. But some have taken this belief to the extremes. What absolutely breaks my heart is seeing the community clown on top players for ever using the bypass, while they're simply voicing their opinions on this crisis that they're facing. Speaking out as a top player myself, I completely understand the concern that these players are expressing. Even if 240Hz isn't much different, in the context of the top 10, it could become much harder if the worst case scenario comes to fruition. The daemon list made a very well made sheet showing their thoughts on these potential physics changes, with Doggy explaining their experiences with 360 compared to 240. They've showcased completely valid concerns on where to go from here, and they haven't even made a decision on what action they'll be taking. They literally stated that they're going to wait and see how the physics play out before making an official call. Seeing this response has made me wonder if everyone just hates all the top players and want to see them fall from grace when their completions and verifications are one of the best ways to help drive this game forward. Call this an overreaction if you want, but I've genuinely not seen a single person listen to the daemon list statement. You really have to be in the perspective of the top players in order to truly understand how much of an impact that some of these scenarios have at their worst. Though regardless of what ends up happening, it's best to plan for the worst and prepare in advance in any of these cases. A very safe choice while all of this blows over is whatever refresh rate you're currently playing on, make an effort to try and get used to 240 FPS in advance in preparation for the update. But regardless of your view on this whole debacle, let's try to enjoy 2.2 if it releases. Yeah, I said if, not when. I'm genuinely pessimistic about release dates at this point. I myself have been a bit worried about the changes coming, so much so that I've switched to playing on 240 FPS until Update 2.2 releases myself. I've got my own project I have to verify, called FLAMEWALL, which is aiming towards the top of the daemon list. It's actually gone very well though. I got 40% just a few days ago. Make sure to tune into the streams for that, link in the description. Anyway, that'll just about do it for me. If you like what you watched today, consider watching this video on how to get better at Geometry Dash. Thanks for watching, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one, assuming I haven't been eaten alive for making this video.